Hey, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, all. We want to first of all, as we get going, we want to thank Rewire You for going another year of sponsorship with
Thanks,
us.
guys.
And so if you're looking for any spiritual formation for your missionaries or yourself, great stuff that you can run through individually, but also take teams through, almost like a monastic training for missional group. So it's the only cats we know doing this
True
around the world.
story.
So
I've had multiple people tell me they've reached out to Rewire for help from seeing them on the
awesome. That's
podcast.
what we want to hear. So glad they're with us.
So
Hey,
hopefully we get a little kickback from those signups.
even like a gift certificate to Home Depot would be great.
Yeah.
So Taylor and I, John, I don't know if you know this, but we're going to buzz down to Los Angeles in a few days.
Okay.
And we were invited to share the Brave City way with 70 different denominational leaders. And we're pretty excited about it. Traditionally, because of the incredible decline of denominations, we've always had to say, look, we're going to spend our time primarily with the new entrepreneurs, um, almost as if, well, eventually the denominations will fade and they won't be a resource anymore. It won't be an option. But it's never been necessarily anti-denomination. We've just had to put our eggs in the basket of training leaders to start from nothing. But when you get invited to kind of share your way of thinking about church planting and church in general with that many leaders that clearly care, like I feel like I know hundreds of denominational execs, and they all love the Lord. They all love the mission. They all are doing all they can to stem the tide and you know kind of reboot, but there are significant dilemmas with what they're dealing with. And so I don't know, I thought it would be kind of interesting. We'll give a report after that, but I thought it would be kind of good to just to do a maybe a short on denominational dilemmas and opportunities, some stuff we'll probably bring up with them. um, and this was a 5 minute little thing I did waiting for Taylor to show. And I'll just have you guys riff off of this. I think eventually there will need to be a list of the unique dilemmas of any movement groups. So not everything is denominational based. There's lots of movements that have got started that are not, but many of those movements also are finding that they can't seem to get the traction in the kind of this new world
Well, I mean, I feel like in our lifetime, we'll see the new denomination as the movement,
potentially. Yeah,
like where you would say something like, what's a denomination? Lutheran.
sure.
Where you would say something like that, you'll now say a specific type of movement that's happening.
Yep.
And
Yep.
denominations will more, I don't know, either fade to black. It already seems like they're doing that.
Yep.
We just met with a young lady recently who's thinking about moving here to work on our staff. We were talking about her before this started, and she's been involved in following Jesus, faith life, pursuing his call on her life for years now. And she was not able to think of one denomination.
Hmm.
She wanted to ask, she asked what
She
denomination.
just didn't know what was out
She
there.
asked what denomination we were. I got to talk to her a bit about kind of ecumenical thinking and movement thinking, and how it's shocking to say this now, 20 years after I finished my theology degrees, but what we think about certain denominational ideologies don't actually um, even become a source of conversation in our
Yeah.
movement. And I asked her, "What are you? You know, what's your background?" And she wasn't even really familiar with any denomination.
Yeah.
And I find that to be the case a lot. So I was just thinking, like, I think movement guidance is going to become as valuable as denominational.
Yeah. Got me thinking about like what would it be if we were somehow helping disciple movements or even discipling denominations back towards a more movemental way of doing what they do. I also think about I was with some guys in Nashville, kind of an eclectic group of just individual men and women that they were almost playing a role as like chief of staff for high government leaders, some of the highest in the
Hmm.
state of Kentucky, also nationally, somewhere in the DC area. And I was asking them about what they were doing. It was incredible what they were doing within the cities related to money, political sort of connections, and the poor. And we were talking about where they came out of, and all of them said, "Man, I don't even go to a church anymore." Which I think initially I was like, "Well, shoot, there's some more that aren't doing." But after you see what they're doing in the world, you go, "Oh no, they're just like us. They've just found their niche and how they can affect the world." I also was with a good friend of mine that leads a national sort of justice work that used to be a part of the Lutheran denomination. It's called Lutheran Family Services, and he's one of the directors of that nationally. And he said, right now there's only about 350,000 people in Lutheran churches in America, and they think in about 10 years it will be down to 50,000. And it's just simply what we call an aging out.
Mhm.
The predominant population of the church population in America is nobody really talks about this. It's over 70. So we are in the next 15 years going to see a what will appear to be almost a collapse of denominational numbers, metrics, all that type of thing. And so I just wanted to like go through a quick list I made, and you guys like cut me off as I go through these, but let's just comment. I want to talk about the dilemmas first of any structure, denominational structure, movemental structure. Um, and these are in no order of importance. I just started brainstorming, but number one, we always run into what we call old money problems. So usually the people that are still funding denominations are on the uber conservative side of every denomination. And oftentimes that will lead to other issues. So I also wrote down ministerial code of ethics, which most of the time were written during prohibition years. So a good majority of denominations, they don't allow the leaders, the ones that are going to start their missionary movements, to have a beer with a neighbor. And a lot of the reason why they won't go after those like ministerial code issues is because of old money. They know that the funders that have put in off of the family foundations or the largest churches in that movement, oftentimes they will not budge on these types of issues.
Yeah,
So,
so you either sign a covenant saying you won't,
or you just
or you
lie.
keep it under
Yeah.
wraps majorly. Yeah.
Yep. So there's an old money issue. We have clearly the aging out dilemma, which means the business model, number three, the business model of church and then getting money from churches to support new missions, that is now a drying up financial pool. There's no way to actually argue against that. It's that business model is going to go away. You also have an issue of a leader pool. So most denominations set up credentialing, right? Seminaries, some type of a degree that would lead to a credentialing and eventually an ordination. About half denominations require about a 6 year process for that, some 8 to 12. And so the leader pool was very, very small. I remember some Lutheran guys here in St. Louis. I think St. Louis had the largest Lutheran contingency in the country. And they said back in the 50s and 60s, they could not build churches fast enough or get seminarians out fast enough because they were just filling buildings full of people. And that's now the opposite. Most denominational leaders I talk to now go, yeah, we don't know where the new ones are coming from because most people are not willing to go into debt for a Bible degree or a seminary degree. They know that there are not churches waiting to give them a job like it used to be back in my day in the 80s. There was always church. Like you go down to the bulletin board in the basement of the seminary and you can just decide where you want to go work. It's not the case anymore. So there aren't jobs
And it
anymore.
seems like a lot of people are chalking this up to um, Christianity as a whole is crumbling and failing in our nation or in the world. Um, Virtue and the fabric of our ethic. But what we've seen is that's not necessarily the case.
Yeah.
Um, Especially with young people, there's a passion there that we saw when we were young. It's that
Yeah.
the institutional structures seem to be either failing or shifting or something.
Too hard to get into, too expensive to get into, and they don't want to go do even if it succeeded, they don't like what that looks like for them. So
Well, and things have just changed. This is why we want to help, is the ways that you as in Hugh, that you would have manifested or acted out some type of leadership when you wrote Tangible Kingdom, what, 15
yeah,
years ago?
somewhere in there.
Those same methods don't work
Yeah,
anymore.
yeah,
There's a shifting in how people receive information, how they seek out guidance, and so moving with that
yeah,
is pretty important.
yeah. So I put number five, developmental or the development of missionary aptitude is like it's not in the seminaries. We didn't train for missionary skills. So even if you get leaders out of the school systems, if you will, the preparatory um, deal with the denomination, they've only still learned what we would call skills for the pastor teacher.
Hmm.
But the missionary aptitude has not been developed, usually during a seminary process or something like that. That's a problem, obviously, because these would be the leaders of our new churches. So next, I'd say there's the financial pathway that we've done in church planting actually leads people away from what we would call critical Brave City nuances. So like when we did our first grade page, we talked about Luke 10 and Jesus sending people into a city, and he starts off with going in to get the peace of the city. And we shared our story many times about the businesses that we were doing, both Birmingham and Alton. They were there to get the peace of the city in a lot of ways. And so we had to live into some nuances of not carrying a church planting card or a denominational badge. We just had to be really good people in these cities. But the way that we have funded church planting, the planter feels like they have to get inertia and momentum so fast that they actually start making wrong moves with the culture. And that's, I think, related to the financial pathway, usually of 3 years to get something fully sustainable.
And metrics
Yeah,
too, the
yeah,
metrics that
correct.
just make you feel like you're doing a good job.
Yeah. So that's a problem. We already mentioned the ministerial code of ethics. And I just put there in parentheses, it's generally been based on fear of sin versus what leadership is. Somebody leading a church is supposed to be an example to the flock, if you will, or their friends about what it means to live as a missionary. But most of our code of ethics were based on not screwing up and not going to jail and not sleeping with the secretary or whatever it is. So it was generally fear based, not leadership based. Um, I put down number eight, theological distinctives are a dilemma with denomination. I mean, most of I think it's well over 130 denominations in America. Most of those all believe in the main story of Jesus, but they split hairs over doctrinal or polity distinctives. And right now, as Taylor was saying, nobody in the real world cares at all. We have to prop up a infant baptism issue, or um, only ordained clergy can share communion. Then we've got significant problem. It's almost like an impossible pathway for anybody to follow in that. So we would obviously say in a Brave Cities way, you have to be less uh, you're not less faithful to the scriptures, but you'll probably end up being less theologically distinctive. We're gonna stick to Jesus and the cross, and then other things. I don't know. It's got to be something that begins to loosen up. Obviously, Taylor mentioned the scorecard or the metrics are going to have to change. Presently, there's still quite a dilemma. And then I just put down at the end there that the denominational structures as we know it are based on pastor teacher. Okay, so let's move to some happy land for a second. Anything that you guys feel like I missed on some of the unique dilemmas of traditional denominational structure in anything related to the mission?
I mean, it's a good list. I'm eager
I
to
feel
hear what
bad giving
you're.
the list because we're not really talking about it, and
Well, right, that's exactly
we're
right. So I'm
droning
thinking
out a
about
little
like
bit.
this group of leaders and like what they might say. Like you said, it's 70 different denominational leaders. Are they so they're from all sorts of mainline denominations?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Right. And so it'll be very interesting to see like what they kind of offer back as the challenges. But I do think that's like as you're going through the list, I'm like, and so right, but like, but
Well, I mean,
We
I
might,
would say, go ahead.
I was just going to add that many of our denominations have aligned deeply politically in the last 5 years. That's now a significant problem.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, on both sides of the aisle, and so then that creates a dichotomy within the faith. The amount of social media posts that you can find of someone saying, "How can anyone claim Jesus and support this person?" And the fact that two different sides can think that about two different people is really an unbelievable psychological phenomenon
Mm-hmm.
that we follow the same Jesus, but people can say like, Hugh, if you in any way, shape, or form stand in the corner of this political figure, there's no way. I'm not saying
So they
like
say there's no way.
I'm concerned. There's no way that you know the same Jesus that I know. And John, if you stand in the corner of the opposite, the opposing political figure,
Mm-hmm.
there is absolutely no way that you know the same Jesus that I know. And now we're at this kind of stalemate. But I would like circle, star, highlight, underline, and put an asterisk beside old money.
Huh.
Mm-hmm.
Because
I will. Noted.
when that is not the number one, two, three, four, and five issue of what we're talking about, it's like the Jericho walls fall down.
Yeah.
Like something shifts
Yeah.
within anyone and everyone. Every leader I know personally, and I just had this conversation in many ways with my brother, who is leading a church with a tremendous amount of old money, but aging out, leader pool. What is this word, Kay?
Credentialing issues.
Credentialing,
Yeah.
development.
Of missionary aptitude.
I feel like everyone has the confidence of how to navigate those things. Like the metrics thing is hard because we like to feel like we
But we
have,
do know what the new ones probably should
yeah,
be.
yeah. I can feel a sense of confidence in I'm connecting with the lost and the hurting. I'm leading new things in my city. Leaders are going to lead new things. And those new things are going to generate energy and hope and momentum. But we don't know what to do about the money thing. And so at the end of the day, it's like I can't lose this underwriting. And I understand that. So I do want to say that that kind of flavors the entire list.
Got it. I just thought of another one. The basic hierarchical structure and related to pastors falling and what that does to movements. That seems to be pretty ubiquitous from Southern Baptist to TD Jakes just a few days ago. Who knows if he was, but apparently he had a stroke after his church booted him out
Hmm.
because of, potential. So in any movemental, if the hierarchical leader falls, a lot of stuff seems to crumble. So that's becoming, it used to be that there'd be two or three a year we'd highlight, and now we're going, oh shoot, Mega Church Alley in Dallas, I think just lost three-quarters of their lead pastors. So that's a problem because people look at that and they get tired of it. People leave the Catholic Church finally when there's enough sexual abuse. They're now leaving most of our movemental groups because of the similar deal. So Let's move to what we think would be some possibilities or what we're presenting as like maybe a pathway forward. Um, so this would be maybe a little bit funner. It's kind of a bummer because we all came out of denominations. I came to faith in the denominations. So it's we're not pointing fingers or poking fun. We're just saying we've lived through this weird transition with denominations where once they were very encouraging partners with us in mission, we can hardly point people to these groups anymore because of what they can't offer anymore. So there's a sadness there. But here's some possibilities of maybe a Brave City orientation or a Brave City progression. Again, in no order, but I just put we're offering a sustainable life for long-term missionaries. It doesn't mean that anybody's going to get rich or hit it big, but we at least are offering because they're going to be creating businesses that have some sustainability to their life. So, in and we're doing that because number two, we're angling towards the poor. Brave City Progression is specifically aimed at going into areas that are marginalized. And so you don't need as much to live in these areas. So when we talk about having a sustainable life, John, you barely make it. Halters barely make it. The McCalls barely make it. But we're set up for the next 40 years. We can all make it. We can stay on mission because there's some sustainability in the works that we're putting our hands to.
And another way of saying we barely make it, we say that sometimes uh, because it's our nature to kind of laugh at the pattern of our own choices, apostolic choices. But what we do feel like is we've chosen a little bit of a life of daily bread.
Yeah, that's
Um,
exactly
I
right.
I wouldn't say
Mana
that.
mana dependence is barely making it, but
Yeah,
it's
it
also making
sounds.
it just fine.
I only meant, I'm with you. I only meant we don't have dollars storing up that we have the ability to throw into retirements
Yeah,
but yes, wealthy to the rest of the world, absolutely.
Yeah,
But on just like the way that we would normally think of putting money away and kind of
right.
putting more nuts in the old tree. Generally, we find that leaders of brave cities just do what they need to get along.
Mhm.
yeah.
And so,
For example, if the average Western family with five children wants to do a summer vacation, they start planning for that and putting money away for that, and that's reasonable,
yep.
and nothing is wrong with that biblically for the most part. But by watching these two guys in their life, what we would do is we would have to find some side work. We'd go, bid out a logging job or see if we can do a warehouse clean out, or we'd, sell a bunch of bikes that we found on the side of the road or something like that. Manna is a great, um, analogy for it. I think tent making is a great way to look at it. And to be clear, I've watched John and Hugh and many other quote unquote missionary leaders. This is the life they've chosen to kind of pray for daily bread, and then use their hands and their skills to see if they can make it happen.
It's interesting though. We don't talk about it much, but because we're focused so much on going to cities and parts of cities that are struggling, there is like outside of just the intrinsic call to be with the poor, for just the relationship because it's God's heart, because it's good for us, we grow spiritually, all of that. There is in a Brave City ideology, there's more bang for the buck. That's why people now give their money overseas because they know if I put in the water well in the south edge of Sudan, I actually might be able to. So we talk about the bang for the buck. There is the ability in the way that we think about life. You could go anywhere. You could go to Brooklyn. You could go to inner Denver if you want. You could go to Alton. You can go to a rough part of Birmingham. And it is easier to live. It's harder to live, but it's easier to live because you don't need as much. The houses are cheaper, and the works that you do have more bang for the buck. So when you start a coffee shop in a city of 30,000 that may not have one, that's called bang for the buck. That means it gets you the piece of the city. The people go, man, we're glad you showed up.
Yeah, Lindsay, my wife always says the calling becomes the hack. It's like
Yeah, it's good.
um, someone might ask, like, what has made your kids think so much about hurting, lonely, marginalized like kids that are kind of pushed out of, and Lens would say, well, our calling became the hack. Like we've always been in these situations. They've watched us. They're in schools where they see this. And because of that, that kind of embeds in them in the same way. Like when you're called to a very broken, hurting, lowly, let's just say economically low area, that also becomes a bit of a hack to where you don't need quite as much. Now, John, on the other hand, choosing to live in Tampa
Yeah.
might be a little bit, but even in Tampa, you live kind of on the margins of what would be considered middle, upper middle class Tampa. And so your lifestyle and let's call it financial output is probably a little less than if you lived in like the nicer areas of St. Pete or whatever. So in a lot of situations, the actual, heralding of brave cities, let's take the kingdom to the forgotten places, also becomes
Yep.
a way of life.
Yep. So we're just going to keep going through the list. You got sustainable life for long-term missionaries. We're angling towards the poor because number one, it pleases God. I just put this in the margins. People see God show up. I mean, in a lot of environments where you have lots of money and lots of stuff and nice buildings and the sound system, what we hear from these leaders is that they grow dark spiritually. There's something about being where God's at with the poor. You just see God enough. It helps. It helps your own faith, like you grow. Um, we said there's bigger bang for the buck for both personally and for the city that we serve in. I put number 4. We tend to be able to regain some street cred that's lost by the larger Christian movement. So when the righteous prosper, the city rejoices. That's the idea that when we do good works in a city, we actually, and we've heard it many times, people go, "You're not like what we thought Christians were," or you operate differently, or they'll say, "We like the way you guys do life and business and not the way these other Christian people I've met do." So I think in a Brave Cities way of life, you actually can get people to look up again and go, "Well, I know some Christians that are pretty inspiring." I think that's a huge deal. Um, but number 5, we got ecclesial freedom. So we don't have to fit into any particular box of what we do as a church community. We can, if you ever read the book, the last third of the book is called Churching It Up. We say you lead with mission, you lead with good works, you lead with enterprise, and you learn how to church it up as you go. And to us, that's a huge benefit, especially for younger people that are looking for, they still want this common identity, almost like a monastic community, but they want to know that we're not about Sunday, that we're about every day. So that ecclesial freedom is a big deal. Number 6, I put reinvestment opportunity. So denominations, they usually would ask all the churches to throw in a percentage into either church plant fund or whatever like that. Well, when that business model is drying up, that money's going away. We believe that if you had brave cities, well, we do it now. If when Taylor was down in Birmingham and we needed help up here, they were able to offer help both financially and with time. So they're paying it forward. If we hear something's going on in Phoenix or Phoenix is hearing something's going on in Kansas City, they're actually putting their money and time into that. So if denominations go, well, how do you, I mean, if you just let everybody do their own thing, how are you going to have money to keep helping plant these brave cities? It's inherent in the passion of the entrepreneurs. They tend to want to always help anybody in any city. And if they've got a few extra bucks, they're gonna like, I think if you asked, we were part of a large network and we'd been given donor funds like we have been, and then somebody says, hey, could you pay it forward? That's not a terrible ask. That's like yeah, for sure. We'd love to help out. So I think the long-term longevity of the movement is within the Brave Cities ideology. And again, you're giving out of your business. You're not just giving out of tithe dollars that come in on Sunday. You're giving out of the works that you're actually creating.
What you thinking, man?
Well, I'm thinking that the two lists are very different from one another. And I'm curious about like, because as you're going through the like possibilities, that it's very familiar to kind of our context and what, you know, the like the whole enterprise that we've been working on. But like when you start thinking about like the boxes that these denominational leaders sit in, and start thinking about like the transitional, I think all of the question marks in my mind relate to the ability to see metanoia, to see transformation, to see repentance, even like how you can go from one game to the other game is such a, I mean, we're talking about entirely different modes of being, that I'm curious about like how the, to use like a weird, like how the surfboard can be brought into the box or something like that. Like how are those, how do you make such a transition? And I think that's going to be the kind of the crux of the necessary conversation with,
Yeah.
if these leaders go, hey, I want that, you know, it'd be like cool, but like, you know, I want an elephant, but like that
Yeah.
doesn't mean I'm gonna get it. You know what I mean? Like what, how do we get from here to there?
And when we did the Tangible Kingdom stuff, the book after that was called where people were going, can you apply missionary principles to an existing church context?
Yep.
And we always said yes, just to be positive.
You're like, sure.
And like, oh, we think you can be like there's a gather and scattered element. And for sure, I think there's an element of truth to that. But then spent 10, 15 years trying to help existing congregations move towards, in those days, it was more micro church missional
Yep.
community.
Yep.
And I'll just tell you, as much, I mean, we did, I think, great training, gave them resources, gave them our story. It's just hard. We would always talk about having an alongside pathway. So instead of scrapping all you're doing, maybe you could diversify. So we talk about a diversified model, like start creating a missionary farm system through missional community. So let's just say we said, well, we think that you could hybrid traditional everything and still move towards brave cities. We probably need to be honest and say, as you just said, no, there's a lot of nuances that they just will buck heads or they just don't work all the way. It doesn't mean that a denom couldn't go, hey, we're going to carve off 30% of our remaining money and try to just throw it into some brave city type of. I think you could do that for sure, but I think
Talk
you
them into an R&D department,
yeah,
basically.
R&D,
Yeah.
yeah. So that's always a possibility.
Hmm.
But the fruit that you'll see in the Brave City basket will probably not go into the basket of the traditional systems. And so so as long as the denomination goes, well, we don't care. We're just going for kingdom. We got some money left over. We're just going to give it a shot. I think that can work.
Hmm.
Um,
I have a couple closing thoughts.
you don't get to close yet.
Well, these might lead to
All right.
conversation. We only have about 10
You're
minutes.
right.
Yep.
Okay. Closing thoughts.
But I want to hear what y'all think. But what are some other like hefty points we need to
Well,
land?
really, here, I'll just throw them out and then close us out. We think in a Brave Cities orientation where denominations have a very shrinking small pool of leaders, we think we have millions of potential leaders in Brave Cities because we are going to go after entrepreneurs first and then back teach kingdom, ecclesial, so we think there's a massive pool of leaders ready to go into Brave Cities stuff.
In other words, there's finding someone who wants to be trained in deep theological and church history to then articulate and um, teach others to mimic that training is becoming more and more of a needle in a haystack.
Yep.
Finding someone who wants the tenets and the attributes and the experiences of kingdom, uh, perhaps they don't fully understand yet that it's through the person of Jesus, the worship and the surrender to Jesus. But finding that person is like bumping into someone
Yeah.
in a crowded park.
Totally.
Then
Yeah.
we begin to,
And we think everybody's looking for this,
Mhm.
where very few people are looking for the other thing.
Well, yeah, I think I just like in another language, another way of saying that I use a lot and run into is like people feel a sense of like they want to be creators. I mean, we actually even use language like creator economy, right? Like we recognize we're built to build. We're created to create. And people feel that they want to be generative and add value to the world and beauty to the world, whether they see that through a lens of faith or anything or not. It's at some level just we know that. And so like starting there, you're right. I go, that's
No, what I love is I can talk to a 75-year-old pastor and I share Brave Cities and they go, would have loved that. And when we share it with college students, then there's a line out the door of them just going, I know this was an option. So that's why we think the pool is humongous because the kingdom is still what people are looking for and the creation. So, number 9, I put Brave Cities is based on apostle and prophet, not pastor teacher. We backfill with pastor teacher, so they're still there. We still need them as a function in the church, but that's a potential benefit. And then finally, I just put Brave Cities does offer a reallocation of assets, both building, people, and money reallocation. So, friend that helps run this Lutheran Family Services, because of all the Lutheran churches closing, many of those buildings will be donated to this justice arm of the Lutheran Church. And he was asking, can we potentially partner with Brave Cities? Because we'll have the assets, we'll have the land, we'll have quite a bit of money related to this. We just need help thinking about what to do with the reallocation of these spaces, land, and money. And so I think there's incredible potential to walk besides denominations. I'm looking forward to both the critique and just the honest conversations of leaders going like, we'll do anything. And we hope that the Brave Cities progression makes a lot of sense even to them. So you got any final thoughts?
Do you?
well, no, this the whole time I was thinking like going, I think when we were with some denominational leaders, not too long ago, and they had some old church buildings and they were like imagining what could come. And I kind of facetiously, but also I meant it was like, you should turn that building into a cigar bar and a pub. Like just scrap, like old church buildings are the best. But I just, as you're talking about just bringing that up as like the reallocation of buildings, I do personally, I go, man, that's like a fundamental move. If that reallocation of that asset pool can be shifted, I just think unbelievable amount of good can come of that. But back to your like first points of like old money and the way we've always done things and the kind of conservatism that controls things. I think maybe it's the impending doom that will maybe shake loose some of those clinging to, but that has always seemed like a really far-fetched ask. Even in the conversation, it was like laughable to even suggest that you would do something like that with a building like that.
What we are going to do, we're going to offer all of these leaders a sort of a webinar series where we can just talk through these issues, dilemmas, and opportunities. And then we're actually going to start inviting denominational leaders to Alton to do actually a denominational immersion and maybe begin to look at a long-term strategy. So what we just shared today, we'll try to print that up and provide it at some point. But I think I want to wait till after
Yep.
we begin to work with some of these, I think we'll be able to create a pretty comprehensive way forward
It's
for
great.
movements into this. And yeah, peace out.